She had always believed that buying her own home was the start of a peaceful life. After years of saving, searching, and visiting countless properties, she finally found a house that felt just right. It was not the biggest or the most luxurious, but it had charm, warmth, and a garden that reminded her of childhood summers. She signed the papers, handed over the check, stepped inside with the excitement of someone who had finally claimed a place to call her own. She imagined quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, evenings tending to her plants, and the freedom to decorate and live as she wanted. The thought of living without a landlord looming over her thrilled her. For a few months, everything was calm. She painted walls, planted flowers, and introduced herself to neighbors. Most were friendly, some curious, and a few distant. It all seemed normal. Then one morning, as she sorted through the mail, a thick envelope with an official-looking seal caught her eye. The return address made her stomach sink before she even opened it. It was from the Homeowners Association. She had heard stories about HOAs, some positive, many negative. But she never imagined she would become part of a nightmare. Opening the envelope, she felt her heart skip a beat. Inside was a letter demanding that she pay $88,000 in back dues. She blinked, read it again, and even read it a third time to make sure she wasn't seeing things. The letter explained that she owed this enormous sum because of fees and fines. Tied to rules she had supposedly agreed to when she bought the house, her hands shook as she read, trying to find some sense in the numbers. She could not remember ever signing anything that would allow this. It felt like a dream, or more accurately, a bad dream. She sat down, staring at the letter. $88,000. She whispered the number aloud, hoping to make it smaller. It did not work. She felt a mixture of disbelief, fear, and anger swirling inside her. How could an organization demand this much money for rules she never agreed to? She had followed every known requirement, paid her property taxes, and never even received a complaint from anyone. She had tried to read through the letter for some clue that it was a mistake, some footnote that explained the charges. But everything seemed designed to confuse and intimidate. After the initial shock, she did what any rational person would do. She picked up the phone and called the HOA. She explained her situation calmly, hoping that someone would listen, recognize the mistake, and correct it. The response she received was not comforting. The representative spoke in legal terms she barely understood, repeating phrases like governing documents and assessment obligations. They insisted that the charges were valid and that the HOA had the right to collect them. She asked for copies of the documents she supposedly signed. The answer was vague, a promise to send something later, followed by silence. Each passing day without clarification only increased her anxiety. Friends and family offered sympathy and advice. Maybe it's just a clerical error, one friend said. Another warned HOAs can be ruthless. Be careful. The parents, normally calm and supportive, looked worried when she explained the situation. They reminded her that legal battles can drain not only finances but energy and peace of mind. She appreciated their concern, but there was no way she could ignore this. She felt a strong sense of injustice, a need to defend herself against what seemed like an unfair attack. It was not just about the money. It was about the principle. Over the next few days, she reread every document she had from her home purchase. There were the standard closing papers, mortgage documents, and a few HOA pamphlets she had glanced at quickly during settlement. Nothing mentioned these rules or these fees. Nothing indicated she had agreed to pay tens of thousands in back dues. Each time she revisited the papers, her confusion and frustration grew. It felt as if the ground beneath her was shaking, threatening to pull her into a situation she did not understand. Sleep became difficult. She would wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, thinking about the letter, imagining the possible consequences if she could not resolve it. What if the HOA tried to place a lien on her house? What if it went to court? What if she lost everything she had worked so hard for? Her thoughts raced in endless circles, sometimes making her feel paralyzed with fear. The sense of violation was overwhelming. She had always followed rules, respected boundaries, and yet here she was, being asked to pay an unimaginable sum for something she never consented to. Then came the whispers from neighbors. One casually mentioned that the HOA had recently raised fees and added new rules without informing everyone properly. Another said they had friends who had fought similar battles, some winning, some not. These conversations were meant to be comforting, but they also highlighted how unpredictable and powerful the HOA could be. She realized she was not alone, but that did not lessen the pressure. If others had struggled, she knew this would not be easy. She decided to document everything. Each call, each email, each letter she received went into a folder. She wrote down the names of representatives she spoke to, the dates and times, and exactly what was said. She took screenshots of any online notices or communications that mentioned fees or rules. At first, this meticulous recording felt tedious and overwhelming, but soon it became empowering. It was her way of taking control when everything else seemed beyond her control. She felt as though she was preparing for a battle. Even if she didn't yet know how it would be fought, despite the fear, she refused to ignore the problem. Paying $88,000 was impossible, and more importantly, she refused to accept responsibility for fees she had never agreed to. She knew that standing up to an organization with legal power could be intimidating, but the thought of backing down felt worse. She remembered why she had bought her home: for freedom, security, and a place to live without fear. Now, she had to fight to preserve that dream. She spent hours reading online forums and articles about HOA disputes. She learned that many people had faced similar situations, some with resolutions, some without. Common themes emerged. HOAs often overreach, documentation is key, and legal support can make a huge difference. Each story reinforced her determination. She was not the first person to be challenged in this way, and she could not let the experience define her life. She needed a plan. Every day became a balancing act. She had to go to work, manage her home, and maintain her personal life while constantly thinking about the looming $88,000. The letter was like a shadow, following her everywhere. Each bill she received, each routine interaction with the HOA, reminded her that this problem was real and pressing. Yet through the fear and confusion, she found moments of resolve. She told herself repeatedly that she would not be bullied, she would uncover the truth, and that she would find a way to protect her home. Gradually, a strategy began to form. She realized that patience and diligence would be her strongest allies. She would gather evidence, understand the HOA's rules thoroughly, and seek legal advice. She could not rely on hope or chance. She needed facts and a clear plan. The process would take time, effort, and courage, but she felt ready to face it head-on. The first step was to fully understand the charges and identify every point where the HOA had acted outside its authority. As she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by piles of documents, notes, and letters, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear still lingered, but alongside it was determination, clarity, and a sense of purpose. She had bought her home to live freely, and now she would fight to defend that freedom. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew she could not let fear dictate her actions. With each passing day, she grew more committed to understanding the problem, facing it squarely, and ultimately finding a way to protect herself and her home. Her story, which had begun as a journey toward peace and stability, had suddenly turned into a battle for justice. What had started as a simple home purchase had become a test of resilience, intelligence, and courage. The $88,000 letter was not just a demand for money. It was a challenge to her sense of fairness and her ability to stand up against forces that seemed overwhelming. She knew that ignoring it was not an option. She had to act, think, and fight strategically. The first part of this journey was shock, confusion, and fear. But it also marked the beginning of her transformation from a homeowner hoping for peace to someone prepared to face an intimidating institution with courage and determination. She had discovered that owning a home could come with unexpected battles, but she had also discovered that she had the strength to confront them. And with that realization, the foundation for the fight ahead was laid.
Ow.
One careful step at a time. After the shock of receiving the $88,000 bill, she knew that ignoring it was not an option. The fear and confusion had started to fade slightly, replaced by a growing determination to understand exactly what was happening. She realized that the first step in fighting this situation was investigation. She had to find out if the charges were legitimate, and if not, how to prove it. Every day, she set aside time to review every document related to her home purchase, every letter from the HOA, and every piece of information she could find about the rules and fees they claimed she had agreed to. She started with the documents she had from the closing process. There were dozens of papers, all filled with legal terms, signatures, and small print. She had glanced at most of them when she signed, trusting that everything was standard. Now she had to read each page carefully. She highlighted dates, rules, and any mention of fees. She compared what she had signed with the current HOA rules. It became immediately clear that some of the fees were related to regulations that were added long after she bought the house. She had never agreed to these rules, and the HOA had no record of her consent. The discovery was both a relief and a spark of hope. It meant she had a strong argument. Next, she organized her evidence. She created folders for different types of documents, signed agreements, letters from the HOA, emails, and printed notices from the HOA website. Each folder had clear labels with dates and descriptions. She also made a timeline, starting from when she purchased her home up to the present day, noting every communication she had received. The timeline made patterns emerge. She could see where the HOA had failed to notify her properly and where rules had been enforced retroactively. This careful documentation became her shield, something tangible she could use to defend herself. She also began contacting neighbors who had lived in the community longer than she had. Many were hesitant at first, afraid of drawing attention from the HOA, but a few were willing to talk. They shared stories of their own encounters with the association's stories of sudden fines, rules that appeared without warning, and threats of liens. Listening to their experiences was eye-opening. It showed her that the problem was not isolated to her. She was not alone, and there was a pattern of overreach by the HOA. The more she learned, the more confident she felt that she had a strong case. While gathering information, she also sought guidance from professionals. She found a lawyer who specialized in property and HOA disputes and scheduled a consultation. The lawyer listened carefully as she explained the situation and reviewed the evidence she had collected so far. The lawyer confirmed what she had suspected. The HOA had no legal right to demand the $88,000 for rules she never agreed to. More importantly, the lawyer emphasized that proper documentation and patience were key. She needed to continue her investigation while preparing for a formal challenge. The advice was reassuring and gave her a sense of direction. During this investigation phase, she faced moments of frustration. Some documents were hard to obtain. Emails were ignored, and the HOA representatives she spoke to were evasive. Sometimes, it felt like she was hitting a wall. But each setback only made her more determined. She reminded herself that knowledge was power. Every new piece of information she discovered, every document she organized, and every neighbor's testimony she collected added strength to her position. She had to be thorough, because even a small oversight could weaken her case. She also began learning more about HOA rules in general. She read online forums, articles, and even legal guides. She discovered that many HOAs have a history of adding fees and rules without proper notice, relying on homeowners' lack of awareness. She learned about procedural errors that could nullify claims, and about homeowners who had successfully fought unfair charges. This knowledge was empowering. It showed her that she was not helpless. Others had faced similar challenges and had won. She was determined to do the same. While all this was happening, her daily life continued. She worked, managed her home, and tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. It was not easy. Anxiety often crept in, especially when she thought about what could happen if the HOA decided to escalate the matter. But she found ways to cope. She wrote down her thoughts, organized her schedule carefully, and even took short walks to clear her mind. These small routines helped her maintain focus and energy. She realized that facing such a daunting situation required both mental clarity and emotional strength. One day, as she was reviewing the timeline she had created, a realization hit her. The HOA had made multiple errors, from failing to notify homeowners to enforcing rules retroactively. Each mistake was a potential point of leverage in her case. The discovery renewed her determination. She felt that she was gaining control over a situation that had once seemed impossible. The fear that had dominated her thoughts was slowly being replaced by a sense of empowerment. She was no longer just a homeowner receiving an impossible demand. She was an informed, prepared individual, ready to defend her rights. She also began keeping a daily log of communications. Every phone call, email, or letter was recorded with details about the date, time, and content. She even noted the tone of the conversations, capturing moments when representatives were evasive or unhelpful. This log became an essential tool. It was not just about keeping track. It was about creating a record that could support her case if the dispute escalated to legal action. The act of writing down every detail gave her a sense of control and purpose. Neighbors who had initially been reluctant to talk began to open up as they saw her dedication. Some shared copies of their own correspondence with the HOA, while others offered advice on how to navigate meetings and negotiations. Their support was invaluable. It reminded her that she was not alone in facing a powerful organization. The community aspect provided emotional strength and practical insight. She realized that solidarity could be just as important as legal strategy as the investigation progressed. She started to feel a shift in her mindset. What had begun as a frightening, overwhelming situation was gradually becoming a challenge she could meet with preparation and knowledge. She discovered that being proactive, meticulous, and informed was the most effective way to counter the intimidation she had initially felt. Each day, she grew more confident that she could prove the charges were invalid and protect her home from unjust claims. The process of gathering evidence and understanding the rules also revealed something unexpected. She began to understand the inner workings of the HOA, its decision-making processes, and the areas where it overstepped its authority. This insight was empowering because it gave her a roadmap. She now had not only facts and documents, but also a strategy for addressing the situation. She knew where to challenge, where to ask questions, and where to insist on formal procedures. Knowledge had transformed her fear into action. By the end of this investigative phase, she had a clear understanding of her position, had evidence, documentation, testimonies, and legal advice. She had uncovered multiple points where the HOA had acted improperly. The $88,000 demand, once an overwhelming shadow, now seemed like a challenge that could be met with preparation and persistence. She realized that victory would not come quickly, but it was possible. With careful planning, she could confront the HOA and demand fairness. The journey of investigation also taught her patience and perseverance. It was a slow process, filled with moments of frustration and doubt, but every step brought clarity and confidence. She had learned that understanding the problem fully before taking action was essential. The investigation had turned her from a fearful homeowner into a proactive, informed individual ready to face an intimidating situation with evidence and strategy. She felt stronger, more capable, and determined to see this through to the end. In the quiet moments, she reflected on how far she had come. What had started as fear and confusion had evolved into a focused, deliberate effort to uncover the truth. She understood the power of knowledge, preparation, and support from others. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she had laid the foundation for the next phase of her journey, confrontation. She was ready to move forward, armed with the understanding and evidence she had worked so hard to gather. The investigation had given her not just information, but the confidence to face the challenges ahead. After weeks of gathering documents, reviewing rules, and speaking with neighbors, she felt ready to take the next step. Confronting the HOA, she knew that walking into this battle would not be easy. But the preparation she had done gave her a sense of confidence that she had not felt since receiving that initial $88,000 letter. She had a folder full of evidence, a timeline of events, testimonies from neighbors, and advice from a lawyer who understood her situation. Still, standing up to an organization that had legal authority over her home felt intimidating. Her first move was to draft a formal letter. She wrote carefully, outlining her position clearly and calmly. She explained that she had never agreed to the rules that were the basis for the $88,000 claim. She included specific dates, references to her documents, and citations of the HOA's procedural errors. Every claim she made was supported by evidence. The letter was not emotional or confrontational. It was precise, professional, and firm. She knew that if this battle was going to be taken seriously, she needed to present facts, not feelings. Once the letter was ready, she sent it via certified mail, ensuring there was proof that it had been received. The waiting began. Each day, she checked her mailbox and email, hoping for a response. Weeks went by with little more than vague replies and polite delays. It was frustrating, but she refused to let it discourage her. She reminded herself that patience was part of the process. Fighting an institution like an HOA required persistence, careful planning, and keeping emotions in check. In addition to the letter, she began requesting meetings with HOA board members. Some were reluctant, and others refused outright, citing schedules or policies. She persisted politely, explaining that she simply wanted to discuss the charges and clarify misunderstandings. Eventually, she was granted a meeting, though it was clear from the tone that they expected her to back down or leave without resolution. She prepared meticulously, reviewing her evidence, anticipating questions, and rehearsing what she would say. The meeting was not just about confrontation. It was about showing that she was informed, organized, and serious. The day of the meeting arrived. She walked into the HOA office with her folder in hand, her notes organized, and her resolve strong. The board members were professional, but distant, their demeanor signaling that they were used to homeowners who would quickly give in. She calmly presented her case, explaining each point of evidence and highlighting where rules had been enforced improperly. She spoke clearly, without anger, allowing the facts to tell the story. As she spoke, she noticed a shift in the room. Some board members appeared surprised, others defensive, and a few were quietly taking notes. During the discussion, they tried to intimidate her with legal jargon and threats. They mentioned liens, foreclosures, and further fines. She had expected this and did not react with fear. Instead, she calmly referenced her documentation, pointing out each procedural mistake and demonstrating that the claims were invalid. Her lawyer had advised her to remain composed and factual, and she followed that guidance closely. She realized that confidence, preparation, and patience were her strongest allies. Her calm approach frustrated the board members, who had likely expected to meet resistance, not a well-prepared homeowner. After hours of discussion, the meeting ended without a final resolution. She felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief, because she had stood her ground and presented her case clearly. Frustration, because the HOA had not immediately acknowledged their errors or agreed to cancel the charges. She knew this was just the beginning, but it was a critical step. She had established her position, shown her knowledge, and demonstrated that she would not be intimidated. The board had learned that she was prepared, determined, and ready to escalate if necessary. The days following the meeting were filled with additional correspondence. Emails, letters, and phone calls flowed back and forth. She continued to document everything meticulously. Each interaction reinforced her belief that the HOA was overreaching. She discovered more instances where they had not followed proper procedures, which strengthened her argument further. Each piece of evidence was like a building block, slowly constructing a strong case against the massive claim while dealing with the HOA. She also leaned on the support of neighbors. Those who had initially been cautious became more willing to share their experiences and strategies. Some had fought similar battles successfully, offering advice on how to navigate complex rules and board politics. Their support was invaluable, providing both practical guidance and emotional encouragement. She realized that facing this challenge alone would have been far more difficult. Community support gave her the confidence to continue pressing forward. Despite the tension, she tried to maintain balance in her life. She worked, spent time with friends, and engaged in small hobbies to relieve stress. Confronting an organization that had authority over her home was mentally exhausting, and she knew she needed to preserve her energy. She practiced mindfulness, took walks, and reminded herself that she was capable. These small routines helped her remain focused and prevented the situation from consuming her. Entirely, as the confrontation continued, she began to notice cracks in the HOA's approach. Some board members appeared hesitant, while others were forced to admit procedural errors in their correspondence. She realized that her thorough documentation and calm, factual presentation were making an impact. The more she pushed with evidence, the less they could rely on intimidation or vague threats. It became clear that standing firm with knowledge and preparation was effective. She felt a sense of empowerment that had been missing since receiving that first letter. Her lawyer helped guide her on next steps, suggesting additional letters, formal notices, in preparation for potential legal action. Each recommendation was carefully considered and executed. She learned the importance of timing, phrasing, and strategy in confronting an organization like this. It was not enough to simply be right. She had to communicate her position clearly and follow proper procedures. This was a crucial lesson in navigating bureaucracy and asserting her rights effectively. Over time, the confrontation evolved from an initial meeting into a series of negotiations. Each exchange was an opportunity to present her case, challenge improper charges, and reinforce her position. She noticed that persistence, professionalism, factual presentation were gradually wearing down the board's resistance. What had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle was becoming a battle she could manage and influence as she continued. She also reflected on her own growth. The process had taught her patience, resilience, and strategic thinking. She had discovered the power of careful preparation and the importance of remaining composed under pressure. The confrontation was not just about the $88,000. It was a test of her ability to defend herself, her home, and her principles. Each successful step reinforced her confidence and strengthened her resolve. Despite the challenges, she never lost sight of the bigger picture. Her goal was not only to eliminate the unjust fees, but also to ensure that the HOA followed proper procedures in the future. She wanted to protect herself and other homeowners from similar situations. This broader purpose gave her determination and focus. She understood that her actions had implications beyond her own situation, and that thought gave her an added sense of responsibility and motivation. Throughout the confrontation, she maintained meticulous records. Each meeting, phone call, and piece of correspondence was logged, creating a clear trail of evidence. This record became a crucial asset, providing proof of her careful and consistent efforts to address the issue. She realized that documentation was not just a bureaucratic necessity. It was a shield, a way to protect herself and strengthen her position by the end of this phase. She had accomplished several key goals. She had clearly presented her case, challenged improper charges, and forced the HOA to recognize her seriousness. The initial fear and intimidation she had felt were replaced by confidence and strategic thinking. She understood the HOA's tactics, their weaknesses, and the points where she could apply pressure effectively. The confrontation had transformed from a terrifying ordeal into a structured, manageable process. While there was still work to do, she felt empowered by what she had achieved. She had faced an organization that seemed unbeatable and held her ground. She had turned fear into preparation, confusion into clarity, and intimidation into strategy. The confrontation had not only strengthened her legal position, but also her personal resolve. She knew that with continued diligence and support, she could overcome the $88,000 claim and protect her home. The experience also taught her valuable lessons about resilience and advocacy. She had learned that standing up for oneself requires courage, preparation, and persistence. She had discovered the importance of gathering evidence, seeking advice, and maintaining composure in the face of intimidation. These lessons would serve her well in the next phases of the journey, as the confrontation moved toward resolution. By the time she closed her folder each evening, she felt a sense of accomplishment. Each day of confrontation had brought new insights, strengthened her position, and reinforced her confidence. The $88,000 claim no longer seemed like an unstoppable force. It was a challenge that she could face with strategy, evidence, and perseverance. She had taken control of a situation that initially felt overwhelming and turned it into an organized, deliberate effort to protect her home and her rights. As her confrontation with the HOA continued, she began to realize that there was strength not only in preparation and evidence, but also in community and public support. While she had handled everything herself up to this point, she understood that the situation was bigger than one person. Other homeowners had faced similar issues, and their stories provided insight, validation, and potential support. She started reaching out more broadly, connecting with neighbors, and even local residents who had experience with overreaching HOAs. The goal was simple: to understand the broader pattern, to gather additional voices that could reinforce her position. She began attending neighborhood meetings and social gatherings, not just to socialize, but to carefully listen and learn. Conversations were initially casual, but she steered them toward her concern in a way that encouraged others to share their experiences. Some homeowners admitted quietly that they had quietly paid fines or fees they did not fully understand, afraid of confrontation. Others shared their own struggles with the HOA's sudden rule changes and retroactive penalties. Every story she heard reinforced what she already suspected: the $88,000 claim against her was not an isolated case. There was a recurring pattern of overreach, miscommunication, and procedural failure within the HOA. Encouraged by these interactions, she began organizing a small group of homeowners willing to support one another. They shared documentation, advice, and strategies, and discussed their individual experiences with the HOA. The support was not just practical but emotional. Facing such a powerful organization alone had been intimidating, but with others in similar positions, she felt less isolated. She realized that the HOA had relied, at least in part, on the fear and solitude of homeowners. By connecting with others, she was reducing that advantage around this time. A local news outlet became interested in stories about unfair HOA practices. She shared her experience carefully, providing evidence and context without exaggeration. The journalist found her story compelling and began investigating similar complaints in the neighborhood. Her situation began to receive attention beyond the local community. The coverage highlighted the injustices homeowners could face when associations overreach, and it painted her as a determined homeowner fighting for fairness. The support of the media was empowering. Suddenly, she had a platform that amplified her voice, putting pressure on the HOA in a way that personal letters and meetings had not. Public attention also brought other benefits. Lawyers and legal advocates reached out, offering guidance and support. Some neighbors were emboldened by her visibility and shared their own grievances with the HOA. The narrative that had once seemed one-sided began to shift. She was no longer an individual fighting a faceless bureaucracy. She was part of a growing movement demanding transparency, accountability, and fairness. This realization bolstered her confidence and encouraged her to continue pressing her case. Despite the increasing support, the HOA did not back down immediately. Their letters and communications became more formal and slightly defensive. They attempted to continue relying on intimidation, legal threats, and vague references to internal rules. But she was no longer alone or unprepared. Each communication was met with evidence, facts, and reasoned responses. Her growing network of neighbors, combined with media interest and legal advice, made it increasingly difficult for the HOA to act out scrutiny. She also began holding informal meetings with her neighbors to strategize. They discussed what had worked, what had failed, and what could be done next. Each homeowner contributed their insights, sharing documentation, personal experiences, and legal references. Together, they created a plan that highlighted both collective and individual rights. They understood that while the HOA had power, collective knowledge and coordinated action could neutralize much of that power. These meetings were energizing and created a sense of solidarity that had been missing before. While she focused on external support, she also remained deeply involved in the details of her case. She continued reviewing documents, updating her timeline, or refining her correspondence with the HOA. Even as attention grew, she never relied solely on public pressure. She knew that careful preparation and strong evidence were the foundation of her success. Each interaction, whether with the HOA, neighbors, or the media, was informed by meticulous research and careful planning. The combination of community and media support began to affect the HOA. Representatives, who had once been dismissive, became more cautious in their responses. The organization realized that her claims were not going to be ignored and that public scrutiny could impact their reputation. Each letter she sent, backed by evidence and strengthened by community awareness, made the $88,000 claim appear increasingly untenable. She sensed that the HOA was starting to recognize that they had miscalculated by assuming she would accept the charges without challenge. Meanwhile, she felt a personal transformation taking place. The fear and uncertainty that had dominated her life when she first received the bill were being replaced by confidence, clarity, and purpose. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She had discovered the importance of preparation, the value of evidence, and the power of support from others. Every conversation, every shared experience, and every piece of documentation had strengthened not only her case, but also her sense of self, even as the story gained attention. She remained grounded. She continued her daily routines, balancing work, home responsibilities, and the ongoing challenge with the HOA. She took care to manage stress, maintain health, and preserve her emotional well-being. These small but essential practices helped her stay focused and resilient. She understood that fighting such a battle was as much about endurance as it was about strategy. Through this process, she began to notice changes in her community as well. Neighbors who had once been hesitant or fearful started asking questions, attending meetings, and becoming more informed about their rights. Her courage and visibility encouraged others to stand up for themselves, creating a ripple effect. The HOA's approach was increasingly scrutinized, and homeowners were less likely to accept unjust claims quietly. She realized that her actions had consequences beyond her immediate situation, providing hope and guidance to others. At the same time, she remained cautious. Public support and community involvement were powerful, but she knew that maintaining professionalism, accuracy, and composure was critical. Every interaction, every statement, and every piece of documentation had to be handled carefully. Missteps could be used against her. She balanced the enthusiasm of public support with the careful discipline of strategic action. This balance allowed her to navigate the growing attention while keeping her case strong and credible. Her efforts began to produce tangible results. The HOA, sensing increased scrutiny and potential liability, started to respond more carefully. Meetings were scheduled with more transparency, communications became more formal, and some of their initial threats were softened. She could see that the combination of preparation, legal support, community backing, and media visibility was working. The $88,000 claim, once a looming threat, was gradually losing its power. Despite the progress, she never became complacent. Each day required vigilance, careful planning, and strategic thinking. She continued documenting everything, refining her timeline, and preparing for further interactions. She understood that in disputes with powerful organizations, consistency and diligence were key. Every detail mattered, and even small oversights could be costly. Her commitment never wavered, and each step strengthened both her case and her confidence. By the end of this phase, she had achieved several significant milestones. She had built a network of support, gained media attention, exposed patterns of overreach, and forced the HOA to acknowledge her seriousness. She had turned what initially felt like an impossible challenge into a structured, strategic effort with growing momentum. The community, the media, and her meticulous preparation had created a powerful combination that the HOA could not easily dismiss. She realized that victory would not come overnight, but she was closer than ever. The experience had taught her invaluable lessons about resilience, advocacy, and the power of collective action. She understood that standing up for oneself often required patience, careful planning, and support from others. The confrontation had evolved from a solitary struggle into a shared effort with tangible impact. She felt empowered, motivated, and ready for the next step. Resolution. The $88,000 demand was no longer an insurmountable threat, but a challenge that could be met and overcome with determination, strategy, and support. After months of careful investigation, confrontation, and building support, the final phase of her journey arrived. Resolution. She had spent weeks meticulously documenting her case, attending meetings, communicating with neighbors, and gathering evidence. She had confronted the HOA with professionalism and clarity, refusing to be intimidated. The public and media attention had grown, amplifying her story and making it clear that the $88,000 claim could not be ignored. Now it was time to see if all of her efforts would finally lead to justice. The first step toward resolution came when the HOA sent an official notice, acknowledging receipt of her evidence and concerns. The tone was more measured than previous communications. They outlined a plan for a formal review of the charges, promising to consider procedural errors and documentation provided by homeowners. It was not an immediate victory, but it was the first time the HOA had shown willingness to engage seriously with her claims. She carefully read every word, highlighting important sections and noting deadlines for responses. This step signaled that the HOA could no longer dismiss her, and that the tide of the dispute was beginning to shift. She continued preparing diligently. Although the HOA's acknowledgement was promising, she knew the importance of maintaining pressure. She organized her files once more, making sure all correspondence, evidence, and notes were in order. She reviewed her lawyer's advice and planned responses to potential objections. She also communicated with her neighbors, keeping them informed of developments and gathering additional documentation where possible. The sense of shared effort and collaboration reinforced her confidence. She knew that persistence and preparation were still key to a successful resolution. During this period, she attended a formal review meeting with the HOA. This meeting was more structured and professional than previous encounters. Each homeowner who had concerns was allowed to present evidence, and the board was required to respond formally. She presented her case clearly and calmly, walking through the timeline, highlighting procedural errors, and providing proof that the fees were not agreed upon. She emphasized fairness, transparency, and the need for the HOA to follow proper procedures. Her presentation was detailed, factual, and compelling. The HOA initially attempted to justify the charges, citing vague rules and prior assessments. However, she countered each point with specific evidence, legal references, and documentation. Her approach was not aggressive, but it was firm and unyielding. Board members who had once relied on intimidation were now forced to acknowledge the weaknesses in their case. Her lawyer was present to ensure that the discussion remained within legal and procedural boundaries. The meeting lasted several hours, but she left feeling that she had clearly demonstrated the unfairness of the claim and her right to challenge it. After the meeting, she returned home to wait for the board's decision. The waiting period was tense, but she used it productively. She continued reviewing her files, taking notes on potential next steps, and checking in with supportive neighbors and legal advisors. The sense of control she had developed throughout the process helped her manage anxiety. She knew that the outcome would depend on careful consideration and persistence. She reminded herself that victory was not just about eliminating the fees. It was about establishing fairness and accountability. A few days later, she received official correspondence from the HOA. The letter began with a formal acknowledgement of procedural errors and the improper application of rules. They rescinded the $88,000 demand in its entirety, confirming that she was not responsible for any back dues. They also committed to revising internal procedures, ensuring that future rules would be properly communicated and agreed upon by homeowners. Reading the letter, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Months of stress, uncertainty, and effort had culminated in a clear, undeniable victory. Her neighbors celebrated the news with her, sharing in the relief and triumph. Many had been inspired by her persistence and bravery, and some had found their own voices to challenge unfair practices. The sense of community and shared victory was profound. What had started as an individual struggle had transformed into a collective assertion of rights. She realized that her actions had empowered others and created lasting impact beyond her own situation. The experience also taught her valuable lessons about resilience, advocacy, and the importance of preparation. She had learned that facing powerful organizations required not only courage but also meticulous documentation, strategic thinking, and patience. Each step of the process, from investigation to confrontation to building support, had contributed to the final outcome. She had discovered her own strength, the power of evidence, and the importance of standing up for fairness.